They told us the crisis was finally ending. Last month, California announced a historic 9% drop in homelessness, the biggest win in 15 years. But if you walk the streets of LA or San Jose today, it doesn't look like a victory. It looks like a disappearance. Today, we're revealing where those people actually went and the billions of dollars spent to make them invisible. Instead of permanent housing, thousands are shuffled into interim tiny homes or pushed into industrial zones and rural deserts, effectively making them invisible to the official census. As major events like the World Cup loom, the drop reflect a policy of displacement rather than recovery. The air remains tense because the human suffering hasn't vanished. It has simply been recategorized or relocated. Are we truly housing our neighbors, or are we just perfecting the art of hiding them from the public eye? The magic of the 2026 census. The 2026 point-in-time census arrived with a triumphant flourish, yet its methodology reveals a calculated magic trick of data manipulation. While officials tout a historic drop in homelessness, the reality hinges on a single, frozen night in January. If an individual wasn't physically visible on a sidewalk during that specific window, they effectively ceased to exist in the state's eyes. This statistical snapshot ignores the thousands dwelling in unstable, doubled-up housing or hidden in deep industrial corridors. The most jarring revelation involves the recategorization of 15,000 individuals. By shifting them into interim tiny homes or court-mandated treatment programs, the state scrubbed them from the unsheltered list entirely. They aren't permanently housed. They are simply in a data-driven purgatory. This administrative sleight of hand creates a 2026 mirage of success, where the numbers plummet overnight, while the actual human crisis remains as volatile as ever, just buried beneath new labels. When existence became illegal, the 2024 Supreme Court ruling in City of Grants Pass versus Johnson fundamentally reshaped the American landscape, reaching its peak intensity across California in 2025 and 2026. By overturning years of precedent that barred cities from punishing individuals for sleeping outdoors when no shelter was available, the court effectively gave municipalities a green light to criminalize the simple act of existing in public space. Under this new legal framework, the state no longer carries the burden of proving a bed is available before dismantling a community. Consequently, 2026 data showing a 9% drop in unsheltered homelessness in the Golden State is not necessarily a victory of housing, but one of logistics. Cities have pivoted from high-cost social services to low-cost enforcement, utilizing the legal power to shuffle the unhoused every 48 hours. This relentless cycle of displacement pushes the vulnerable into industrial shadows or across city limits, removing them from official point-in-time counts. As local governments prioritize visible aesthetics over human stability, the drop reflects a policy where the problem has not been solved. It has just been made legally invisible. The crisis has shifted from finding a home to surviving a reality where existence itself is a crime. Inside the tiny home paradox. The 2026 California landscape is increasingly dotted with HomeKey plus projects and tiny home villages, heralded as the aesthetic solution to a decades-old crisis. However, beneath the Instagram-friendly facades of these modular communities lies the tiny home paradox. While 2026 data indicates thousands are transitioning through these sites, they are legally classified as interim housing, a functional halfway point that often feels like purgatory. Residents are frequently subject to rigid 8 p.m. curfews and strict no-guest policies, creating an environment that many occupants describe as a pretty prison rather than a dignified home. The $2.1 billion proposition, one bond may have funded the physical structures, but the operational reality remains a point of contention. With typical stays capped at just 6 months, the countdown to being exited back to the street begins the moment the key is turned. Critics argue that despite the colorful paint and private doors, the lack of long-term stability means the state is merely managing homelessness in smaller, more expensive boxes. For the individuals inside, the privacy of a roof is often overshadowed by the clinical lack of autonomy, proving that without a path to permanent residency, these villages are just a temporary reprieve in a systemic cycle. The 2026 tourism cleanup. As California prepares for the global stage of the 2026 World Cup, and the aftermath of Super Bowl 60, a massive tourism cleanup is underway. While official reports boast a 9% decrease in unsheltered populations, critics argue this great displacement is merely a geographic shell game. Major events have accelerated aggressive beautification initiatives, prioritizing tourist corridors and stadium perimeters. However, a recent UCLA study reveals a sobering 5-to-1 ratio. For every one person successfully housed, 5 others are simply displaced. Rather than finding stability, thousands are being pushed into the high desert, the Central Valley, or across state lines to avoid visibility during international broadcasts. This whack-a-mole strategy creates a statistical illusion of success in major hubs like Los Angeles, while rural towns, often lacking the infrastructure to provide support, see a corresponding surge in their own local crises. In 2026, California isn't solving homelessness. It is exporting it to the shadows. The care court reality, treatment or institutionalization. By 2026, California's care courts have transitioned into a statewide mandate. Yet the data reveals a startling gap. While officials projected 12,000 participants, only 3,092 petitions were filed by early 2026, with fewer than 700 resulting in active treatment plans. This gray area exposes a controversial reality. Rather than finding homes, the state is increasingly moving people from unsheltered street counts into judicial and clinical columns. With the 2026 expansion of SB 27 now, including those with bipolar disorder, the boundary between voluntary support and coercive institutionalization has blurred. Critics argue this judicial pipeline acts as a statistical eraser, recategorizing the vulnerable as patients to sanitize public spaces. For those caught in the system, care court often feels less like a pathway to recovery and more like a legal detour toward conservatorship, where the homeless drop is achieved not through housing, but through the systematic loss of personal autonomy. Living in the shadows of vehicles, beyond the visible tent cities, a statistical ghost population is quietly reshaping California's 2026 data. While Governor Newsom's administration celebrates a headline-grabbing 9% reduction in unsheltered homelessness, the largest decline in 15 years, critics argue the success is an artifact of narrow data collection. A massive segment of the unhoused remains hidden in the shadows of vehicles. People living in cars, vans, and RVs are technically classified as unsheltered, yet they are notoriously difficult to track during the state's point-in-time counts. As local governments increasingly utilize grants' past powers to enforce vehicle dwelling bans, this mobile population is pushed into industrial peripheries or constant movement, effectively disappearing from the official census. For many, a van isn't just a vehicle. It's a desperate shield against the criminalization of the sidewalk. Parallel to this data gap is the escalating doubled-up crisis, where families live 10 to a room in precarious, overcrowded conditions. According to the California Department of Education, over 85% of the state's 183,000 homeless students are doubled up rather than in shelters. Because these families are technically housed under federal HUD definitions, they are omitted from the primary homelessness statistics that drive policy. This creates a dangerous paradox. While the state claims the tide is turning, the number of working families on the brink of collapse continues to hit record highs. In 2026, California's homelessness drop may be less about solving the crisis and more about failing to count those who have found a way to hide. Solving a crisis with handcuffs. The jail-to-street pipeline has become a central, yet hidden, engine behind California's reported 2026 progress. By leveraging the legal authority to arrest for illegal camping, cities have entered a cycle of solving a crisis with handcuffs. When an individual is booked for a short-term stay, they are effectively removed from the unsheltered census. However, this statistical dip masks a destructive reality. Once released, these individuals carry a fresh criminal record that acts as a permanent barrier to employment and housing. Data suggests that while jails are temporarily absorbing the visible problem, they are simultaneously fueling long-term recidivism. Instead of bed in a shelter, many are given a cell only to be returned to the sidewalk with fewer resources than before. In 2026, the homeless drop is often just a temporary transfer of a human being from a street corner to a booking log, trading sustainable solutions for a cycle of punitive displacement. Where the $40 billion actually went. By early 2026, California's investment into the homelessness crisis has surpassed a staggering $40 billion since 2019, yet the financial breakdown reveals a troubling shift in priorities. While the state celebrated a 9% reduction in unsheltered populations, an investigation into the homelessness industrial complex shows that funding for permanent, low-income housing has plummeted from a peak of $6.8 billion in 2023 to just $1.5 billion in the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year. In its place, resources are increasingly diverted toward the aesthetics of success, specifically encampment sweeps and enforcement. Governor Newsom's 2026 budget maintains a dedicated $100 million for encampment resolution grants, a move critics argue prioritizes the clearing of sidewalks over the clearing of wait lists for stable homes. The beneficiaries of this massive spending are rarely the unhoused themselves, but rather a growing sector of private contractors and large-scale nonprofits. Investigative reports have identified that over $100 million has been paid to private construction and hazardous waste firms tasked specifically with dismantling camps. These companies, such as the Singh Group and Tucker Construction, have seen their sweep revenue soar as cities race to sanitize downtowns for global events like the 2026 World Cup. By funneling billions into a cycle of temporary removal rather than permanent roofs, California has created a self-sustaining economy where the problem's continuation is more profitable than its resolution. In 2026, success is no longer measured by how many people are housed, but by how much the state is willing to pay to make the crisis disappear from view.